I'm Jody, a relationship and sex therapist based in Southern California, and today we're going to be wrapping up the Love is Blind series by talking about the reunion. The reunion started pretty cringe. They had the live music intro, sure, it seems a little extra, don't really think it's necessary, but I get what they're trying to go for. And then we had like the basketball shooting thing, that was just odd. A little cringy. Also having Edmund as like the one getting the ball. I think that the reunion stuff has been done before, and I think there was nothing broke, don't need to fix it. The only other thing that kind of I hate with reunion shows or last episodes of seasons, sometimes they'll do like fully live, and then like there's some that are just really hard to watch because you could tell like it's not very organized, or it was like actually live, so like they haven't done any edits or anything, and those can be a little hard to watch. But let's get into actually talking about the couples. So they started with Megan and Jordan. You know, they did address Jordan's comment about regretting Megan meeting Luca, and he was able to clarify that it wasn't necessarily about Megan, it was more just him acknowledging that kids of that age kind of need some stability, and he may have been signing up for the show and introducing to a person that maybe things wouldn't work out with. Again, he didn't say how it actually affected Luca or anything like that, so maybe it wasn't that big of an effect, but of course young kids, they get attached pretty fast, so he kind of acknowledged that. Megan acknowledged that she could have given Jordan a little bit more of a chance and had a fear of looking for what it could potentially be, maybe not what it actually was. And I agree with that. I think that's always a trick that you're getting into in a relationship, is trying to figure out like what's going to change rather than like accepting a person where they are right now. That's always a tricky one. Megan was talking a little bit about meeting her new partner Paul, and then basically meeting like right after filming wrapped, then having a baby and getting pregnant pretty quickly.
Today I actually have a little bit of a surprise. I am a mom now.
Oh my God. So that was an interesting thing that happened. Jordan wasn't really responding much to it. I could see how that could potentially hurt Jordan, because again, it's like this thing of like, okay, are you ready or you're not ready? Like, okay, clearly you're ready, but with the right person. I could see how that could be kind of hurtful. But Jordan really didn't speak for that. He said nothing but nice things. I thought Jordan was very classy. It was pretty funny to watch his facial expressions when some of the other couples and things were talking, and he kept just saying, oh, I have ADHD, so I have a hard time like monitoring my reaction.
I have ADHD, so I have ADHD. Sorry, this is just really entertaining.
And so I thought that was pretty funny. But overall, that went well. They were a good couple to kind of hear updates about. Then we had Casey and Patrick. This one was where it got a little more cringy. It came up with like the ring of like who gets the ring, and like Casey didn't want to give the ring back and all this stuff. And then, you know, Patrick was basically saying, you know, this is your chance to like apologize.
This is your opportunity to just say you're sorry. Let's wipe it clean. Let's walk away.
And I'm like, it just was all a little bit like, I wasn't really a big fan of like their stuff going on there. You know, and it also mentioned like Patrick acting out and like some of the message like saying that Casey was like the side chick and these other things like, hey ex-wifey, just a little bit like emotionally immature. I understand that he's hurt. I totally get that. But I think there was things that they were both doing that were just a little sketchy. And then it also shared that Casey ended up dating Joe afterwards, and then that fizzled out. Supposedly like she was flirting with him when he was engaged to Madison. And so Madison did not really have good feelings towards Casey, which I was like, okay. Then talk about Joe and Madison. Madison was kind of upset with Casey.
Where at the pool party, I saw Casey, and she had the audacity to tell me we are Eskimo sisters.
Saying, hey, like, I think that you and Joe were kind of like playing with my engagement, and like those are just things you don't do when you're engaged. I totally got where she was coming from with that. Again, there's plenty of fish in the pond. We don't need to be going after people that are on the same show. I get we had connections with some of them, but still, like, if you're trying to maintain a friendship, that's kind of a risky thing to do. Madison and Joe ended up meeting afterwards, after like the engagement, when he left the like tux fitting and all that and had his meltdown. It seemed like it was just same thing, like very confusing. It's like they were cutting it off, but then they made out in the parking lot, and it was just like, what is happening here? I don't understand. Just a little messy. Again, we've talked about this with Joe in the individual video, and I don't really know what's going on with him being kind of wishy-washy. Then we had Nick and Kate. Nick was a little self-deprecating. Obviously, Nick was with Annie at the end, but they did have some addressing of like Nick and Kate's relationship, which I thought was really important, where, yeah, Nick was a little self-deprecating in that, and it still felt a little calculated. It didn't feel fully authentic, but you could see that he was trying, so some appreciation around that, but again, a little odd. They talked about Nick and his tendency to love bomb, which he kind of owned it and was understanding like what that meant, because again, he kind of was was saying the same thing to both people and then kind of owned that that was something that he was doing, being able to actually word it that way. Then they talked about like Kate and Brendan kind of met up, and then it moved to like Casey and Brendan.
I very, very briefly dated Brendan. That night, he was just all over Casey, so.
This all doesn't look amazing for Casey. It's like, we don't need to date everyone from the pods, Casey. I could definitely see how she's gonna lose some like girl points if you start dating people that everyone else had a relationship. Again, everybody was dating each other in the pods, we get it, but once you started to have more legitimate, honed in on who your people were, it does seem like Casey was kind of, and again, I'm not trying to shame a fellow woman in dating, but I think there was something for her of maybe going towards just not the right scenarios, and I could see how that could be like a self-fulfilling prophecy for her, just maybe not making the best decisions. So there's plenty of people out there. We don't need to go after the people that other people have kind of been with. Then it shifted to Nick and Annie. Annie was able to be very mature in this. I know that her reputation kind of throughout the season was not amazing, but she was able to be very mature during the reunion. It was a little bit one-sided, I felt, and she was actually sticking up for Nick. But other than that, nothing too much to report. There were a lot of drama during the season, but the reunion was pretty chill. Then we moved to Allie and Anton. Allie acknowledges that she never actually brought up the strip club concern with Anton.
I had a really hard time just having a real conversation with Anton outside of the pods.
Which is a little sus, because if you're gonna judge somebody for something, that maybe you owe them a conversation about it and to get clarity. And again, you're trusting the word of somebody that you don't really know and actually doesn't even seem to know Anton from what Anton was saying. So there definitely was something to be said there of like, hey, you're not even giving this person an opportunity to have a discussion. Maybe that's something, before we judge them for it, we should. Allie acknowledged kind of having more traditional values and like wanting to kind of be provided for. Nothing wrong with that, but I think that is definitely something of clarifying like what those expectations are and how that actually works for both people. Allie stated that she realized that Anton wasn't the one when he wore flip-flops at the resort.
Lightheartedly when he wore flip-flops in Baja for our first encounter.
I think she was kind of saying it jokingly, but also not saying it jokingly, and it's kind of like, I get it, but I don't think that was helping her case with being perceived as shallow. That was a little hard to hear. We're at a resort in Mexico. We're allowed to wear flip-flops or like slides or sand, like, I think that's where the traditional values, okay, I'm gonna put men in a box kind of came in, and I was like, ooh, that was a little rough to hear. Anton is in a relationship. Allie didn't want to share her relationship status, which I think says something about that as well. Then we talked about KB and Edmund. That one was a little rough to hear. It was talking about like Edmund manipulation, using his feelings as manipulation. I've already talked about this before, that, you know, my spidey senses are saying there might be some neurodivergence for Edmund, and I think sometimes that's something that can get really like misidentified as manipulation, where there's just like a lot of emotion dysregulation or intensity that comes up, and quirkiness oftentimes too. And I think that that was just really playing out there, and I didn't think it was fair. It doesn't also mean that that can't not be perceived as manipulation, but that was a topic that was kind of coming up there. I thought that they handled it really well. They ended it well.
And KB, you are amazing. I would never get a woman like you if it wasn't for this experience. Really.
Can you give me a hug?
But again, there's gonna be some things they just agree to disagree on. I will say Edmund was kind of shooting himself in the foot. He started talking about PMS, and we gotta be really careful when we label Black women as angry, because, you know, that's already such a stigma.
As 9 times out of 10, we got into it right before coming on camera, so I looked like this angry Black woman. Like, I always looked angry on camera, and I even came to you off camera again and said, hey, please stop making me look this way. That is a stereotype.
You want to be able to have the conversation, but you really want to be mindful like the words. And I think Edmund kind of was shooting himself in the foot, where he wasn't going to get any more empathy points when he said that. I'm like, ooh. And then we were done. And then we were celebrating Jordan's birthday, and they were kind of making jokes about the chicken smoothies and all this and that. Overall, it didn't start out well. It ended well. It started out a little rough, but then it eventually got into like some interesting conversations. And there's always going to be some kind of cringy factor to it. We're not all completely emotionally intelligent people, and we're going to have feelings. It's a very emotional process for people, but interesting season. Some people were saying that it was boring. I thought it was okay. It was just a very interesting season. It was one of the first ones, I think maybe it was the first one, where nobody got married at all. Just interested to see what the future seasons hold. Talk to you soon.